Welcome to Real Leaders with Roshini, the podcast with real talk, real questions, real insights, and we hope, real inspiration. For real. We're here at Capitol Grill in downtown Minneapolis, and my guest today is Paul Mooty. He is chairman of Faribault Woolen Mill Company. And that's just part of the story, because the backstory on Paul is pretty darn amazing. Paul, welcome.
Well, thanks for having me.
You know, you have just done a lot of things. You're a University of Minnesota Carlson School grad. You've been in different kinds of sectors. What made you decide in 2011 to buy a woolen mill?
Well, that's actually one of the most common questions. After I went to Carlson, I went to law school, and then I worked for a big accounting firm. Then I practiced law, and I always found that I wanted to be the client and not the lawyer. And so I had the opportunity in the early 90s to get involved with a construction and manufacturing company that was involved with for 12 years, and we sold that. And then was looking for life's next great adventure, and took a little time off to do some stuff at the Carlson School, Center for Integrative Leadership, and then somebody called me, an old fraternity brother, said his dad wanted to talk, and called and said, "Hey, I've got this letter of intent to buy the old Faribault Woolen Mill. I want to know if you're interested." And it was a fairly short time fuse, so I said no. I just wasn't, and
because that's kind of random too.
It was very random. I was out skiing with some buddies in Colorado, and my cell phone rang, and it was Chris, and hadn't talked to him in years. And I mean, I could tell you where I was standing, and then a few months later, I was deleting emails, and I was about to delete the email, and I thought, you know what? Let's go see it. And so off we went.
And just to give a little backstory for people, Faribault Woolen Mill went through, it was started in the Civil War era,
yeah,
right?
1865, yes.
And in 2009, had to close its doors, really was done, down and out.
It was done, and so when I saw it in March of 2011, in the fall before, it sits on the Cannon River next to a dam, which in the old days powered that facility. So it had been on that location since 1892. And I walked in, and the fellow who was giving the tour was caretaking the building and the assets for the various parties, and we walked in, and we were going downstairs where the flood had been. The water was gone, but he said, "Don't touch anything. There's chemical residue everywhere because barrels of dye opened up, and you shouldn't touch anything." And
so you're like, wow.
I'm like, I got to the bottom of the stairs, and I said, I looked around, and I thought, you got to be kidding me. This is, I would have left, but I had ridden with some other folks, so I had to stay. And 2 hours later, the guy that gave the tour had worked there 40 years, Dennis Melkert, and he gave the most compelling story about what the mill was. You kind of washed away what it looked like at that moment because it wasn't very pretty. But he shared the story of the mill, the history, what it had done, and you could walk through and kind of feel that history there. And I went home and I said to my wife, this place is it's a mess, and I don't know where one begins to clean it up. But there's something special there, and so that was that was the beginning.
You and your cousin bought it in 2011 and really turned it around. Give people a quick recap of what you started with and then where you are now as far as employees and the structure and the online presence.
Sure. Well, we started, so I saw March 8th of 2011. By April 22, Chuck and I had a letter of intent. Very quick, because they said the assets, some folks from overseas wanted to buy the equipment. They said, so if you guys want to do this, you got to do it now. And so there wasn't a lot of time to think about it, so we decided to do it, and off we went. And the building was not functional. The flood had ruined the boiler. The plumbing didn't work. We couldn't use bathrooms there. A lot of the lights didn't work. The roof leaked. So we began starting to fix things. And July 5th of 2011 was our first official day. We had 5 people. 3 of us knew absolutely nothing about textiles. 2 people did, and then they started bringing back the old employees. We had them all in the conference room. We had about 40 people there one day to talk. They were all kind of looking at us like, "Who are you guys?
Are you crazy?
Are you crazy?" And but they were seeing that we were making an investment in fixing the building and bringing things back up to which had really been let go for many years. So we got going. By the end of 2011, we had about 40 employees, of which 37 of those were anywhere from, say, 10 to 55 years of experience, and it was those people that made it happen. I mean, you just don't go find people that know how to run textile equipment and know how to do what they did. And they had, I could tell you, that community loves the mill, and there's a passion for it. From the workers, from the neighboring businesses, the city government, the mayor, everybody was absolutely terrific. So off we went. By the end of the year, we had, as I said, about 40 employees, and probably late in that fall or early fall, we started to get press. Carol Levin here did a story on us, and then all of a sudden, the NBC Sunday Evening News showed up. And they did a piece on the Sunday Evening News, and it was a rather lengthy, a minute and a half. It wasn't just mill opens in small town America. It was a really deep story.
People don't realize a minute and a half of airtime can really change your fortune.
And let me tell you what happened. So we had a website at that time with just a few things. We were just starting to make stuff, so we didn't have a lot of stuff. The next morning, it was Monday morning. It was in a controller's office, and I said, "Let's see what we did on the internet." Well, normally, if we'd sell a few $100s, overnight, it was a big deal. It was over $100,000 of sales.
Wow!
From just that NBC, and then ABC came, CBS came. We were on the front page of USA Today, Fox, MSNBC. Seriously, we thought we were, kind of rock stars.
Yeah, well, you were.
Well, the reality is the hard work really hadn't begun. The resurrection of something like that, the Made in America, the bringing back jobs, the things that were really resonating with people, and it was certainly great goodwill and tailwind for us. But the hard work hadn't hit us yet, and trying to take a business that had completely closed and starting from scratch all over again in an industry that had gone offshore by and large. And so
you were really trying to turn things around. I kind of think about the Moses movie. Like, you really had to take people through the desert on this one, but you did. And America loves a comeback story. You worked hard. You had a prideful community that was so invested in the Faribault Woolen Mill.
We absolutely did. And I think the other thing that was, from a family perspective, we rolled up our sleeves. We were right there. We were, 2012, we had a big contract with JCPenney's. And our goal was, we're going to fulfill this thing, and we're going to my wife and I, my wife would, paint walls and, whatever helped in the store, and we would load boxes, we'd package. Our son would come down after college or after classes, and we'd stay overnight, and we do. And when you're in there with your employees and you're rolling up your sleeves and you're part of the team, I think that makes a big difference. I mean, everybody. It's one of our core values at our company is win is one. We're in this together. This is all of us. This isn't about me. In fact, I think an important point on the mill is we're stewards of a great company that started in 1865 during the Civil War, went through the Depression, 2 world wars, and many economic cycles. And those families, the Clemmers and the Johnsons, did an incredible job. And so the reason it was an opportunity for us is because what they did. So we're stewards of that. So we're just trying to, it's not about us, and it never should be about you, but certainly in this case, it's not about us. We're a part, we came in, the employees came back, and so it's been a, very humbling experience. And
Paul, I believe there are no coincidences, though, and you were meant to be where you were at that time.
I think that's very true. I think things happen for reasons, and it's like I said, when I walked in that building and I wanted to leave, well, the guy that was there, if they had just handed me the keys and said, take a walk through this place, I would have been there 5 minutes and I'd have been halfway home and, as fast as I could. But Dennis was meant to be there too and give us that story. And, one thing leads to another. That's not to say this is a journey. It's not a straight line. You just don't add water and stir it and you've got your magic and you're off to the races. It's a long haul. It's a journey, but you gotta realize that and be willing to go on that journey. Not everybody. A lot of people looked at the mill and they weren't willing to do that. Not to say that we're any better than anybody else, but it it is a journey that you have to want to do. And I think in my point in life, and I think Chuck would say the same thing, is there's a mission here. There's a business opportunity, but there's also an opportunity to do something good.
Very mission.
It's a mission driven. Yes.
Very mission driven. I want to talk about Made in America for a bit. So July 2017 comes along. President Donald Trump invites you to the East Wing. What was that all about?
Well, that was one of the stranger things. It was a late Friday morning. Someone comes into my office and says, "You have a call from the White House." And my first thought was, this is a friend playing a joke. And so I answered it. And truthfully, for the first minute or so, I was still rather skeptical. And then I began to believe that this was a real call, and there was a Made in America product showcase they were having, and it was a rather spontaneous idea, and so that's why it was short notice. It was Friday. They wanted us there Monday at 10 a.m. And
one company from each state.
One company from each state.
And you were chosen.
We were chosen. At the very end of that call, I asked the guy, why us? Why us? I said, there's a lot of wonderful manufacturing in Minnesota. We're a small, getting started here. And he said, he was a policy guy in the White House. He says, I grew up in Iowa. And he says, I'm familiar with your company. I'm on your website. And he said, you're exactly what we're trying to encourage and represent. And I said, we'll be there. And then he also asked if we had a longer tenured employee that could join this. And I said, I've got just the lady. And I hung up the phone. I walked down to the plant, and Mary Boudreau, who was 83 years old, worked at the mill for 63 years. I called her over and I said, Mary, got a call from the White House. They'd like us to come to represent Minnesota on Monday. I said, and they would like us to bring a longer-term employee. And I said, I can't think of a better person to represent us than you. And would you go? And she looked at me and kind of quizzically, and then she said, well, what would I wear? And I said,
I hope you guys bought her a great outfit.
I said, Mary, why don't we decide if we're going before we decide what we're wearing? And so she went, and I think, and I'm not positive, but I think this is either the second or third time she was on an airplane in her whole life.
That's amazing.
And she got to go to the White House.
There are no coincidences, Paul.
Amen.
Let me move into 2018. So if that weren't enough at the East Wing of the White House, Google calls you up, picks you as the company from the state of Minnesota to do what? Well,
they do an annual economic impact report, and they highlight one company from each state. And again, for some reason, we got selected for that. So not only were we highlighted in a report, but then we were invited out to Google for a couple of days. Our CEO, Tom Killeen, and I went out for, it was 2 or 3 days, and got to meet all the other companies that were selected, and then various meetings with different Google folks, and just got to, amazing campus, amazing experience.
Good food at Google?
They've got... they've got soccer fields, and they've got tennis courts, and you bring your dog to work, and the building, everything is just, it's a fabulous facility.
It's the Google experience. All right, well, speaking of food, we are in Capitol Grill in downtown Minneapolis, and it's known to have a good bar, some good bartenders. If you were a drink or a spirit or a wine or any of those things, what would Paul Mooty be?
My goodness, I would be, wow. Now that's a question. I would probably be, I'd probably be like a red wine. And I just think it's something to enjoy. Like I mentioned earlier, business is a journey. You could take a nice glass of wine and enjoy it. And it's not something you have to drink fast, and then just try and enjoy it as you drink it. Enjoy the journey.
That is a great way to look at it. Before we go, Paul, I want to know, what is your advice when it comes to risk taking?
Well, I would say that when you assess something, and that's interesting. That's a great question, because in this case, from what I mentioned, we didn't have a lot of time to think about this particular venture, or even sort of the bandwidth of what it might cost and how long it might take. But I would say on risk taking, sort of be prepared and have a sense of how much you're able to risk in terms of capital, and the time you're willing to commit to it. Because I think we've been fortunate and blessed to be able to to have the capital and the time to take this on. And sometimes that's not always the case. So when you're taking something on, I think it's very wise to understand. In a lot of, and I'll say this, a lot of times, even if you have the time to look it over, you're going to find surprises along the way that are going to cost. You thought you're going to have X dollars, but all of a sudden, oops, this came up, and I need another 25% on top of that, and
which could break a lot of people.
Which could break a lot of people. So I think you have to have a number, and then also. Because it's kind of like building a house. You have a budget, but you better add, 15, 20% for the things that are going to come up along the way, and not just have that hard number, because it's and it's not just the capital. It's your time and your emotional capital that you put into something. Because I could tell you, there's a lot of emotional capital that goes into something like this. It's you get to go to the White House and you get to go to Google, but you also get to do some things that are not always great fun. But
exactly.
Again, it's a journey. And you work through all of that.
And your journey has also led you to become a grandfather.
Yes, twice, a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old, 2 boys, Cameron and Blake, and the loves of our life. They're just, it's such a joy, such a joy.
Well, Paul Mooty, chairman of Faribault Woolen Mill, a joy to talk with you today.
Well, thanks for having me.
Well, thank you. Until next time, keep it real.